pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Then I will entertain roll call, please.
Mr. Fitzer. Here. Mr. Harrell.
Here.
Mr. Kucera.
Here.
Mr. Nushai.
Here.
Ms. Redmond. Mr. Sanaki. Mr. Tinlin. Mr. Watson. We had a good start.
So we have no quorum, so we can probably do not much of anything until one other person shows up.
Correct. I always recommend that a time frame be set at which point the meeting will be canceled for
Like
lack
10 or
of a
15
quorum.
minutes, and then if they don't show, we...
Yeah, something like that. It's up to you, of course. But as the chair, I think you have the ability to set that time frame and say, we will be here unless a fifth member shows up, in which case we will proceed. So I would pick a time and then stick to it.
Does the chair need a motion or by himself? He can do it by himself.
And Q can't make a motion with four without quorum.
Yeah,
Oh, well,
yeah,
yeah,
so
right.
it has,
You're right.
it has to be.
I thought the same thing.
It has to be at the call of the chair, so.
Okay, it's 7:30 now, but if I said 7:45, if we don't have a quorum by that point?
If you want to set 7:45, that's fine. And then if we don't have a quorum by 7:45, we would say the meeting is not going to move forward.
Right. I had two excuses. Mr. Tinlin and Mr. Watson called, said they
saw
weren't
those.
attending, but I didn't hear from anybody else.
Okay.
Kind of surprising.
Well, we'll see. And if contact information is available for any of the people we did not know were not going to be here, an option is always to contact them and ask them if they're able to.
I only got something from Scott.
Yeah, Scott, Tinlin and Watson both asked to be excused, so. So there's a couple people we haven't heard from.
So you want to tell jokes for about 10 minutes?
There's our quorum.
Here we go. Evening, we can start now.
I'm sorry.
And we can start now, we were short of quorum.
Oh, you were short, okay. I'm,
Sign her in, and I will go for agenda item number 4 is the approval of this agenda. Anyone have any changes to make to this agenda? Seeing none, we'll just automatically approve it. And we'll move on to agenda item number 5, is the approval of the regular meeting minutes from August 23rd, 2022.
Give me 1 second, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion to approve the regular meeting minutes from August 23rd, 2022. Second.
Have a motion, support, any changes, nothing? Roll call, please.
Mr. Kucera.
Yes.
Mr. Nushai.
Yes.
Ms. Redmond.
yes.
Mr. Fitzer.
Yes.
Mr. Harrell.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Agenda item number 6 is public discussions on items not on the agenda. Anyone from the public wishing to speak? Seeing none, I will close public discussion. And we will move on to agenda item number 7, a discussion of the sign ordinance amendments full draft.
Yes, thank you. So, for anybody who might be watching, I'm Joe Tangari from Giffords Webster, one of the city's planning consultants. So over the last few meetings, we have been going through pieces of an updated sign ordinance. And what I wanted to do at this meeting was provide you with the full, clean draft of the sign ordinance so you can just see what it will look like. And just see if anybody has any further questions, comments, anything else they'd like to see or things that we might need to clean up. And then my goal would be to, subsequent to that conversation, provide any updates that need to be made based on our discussion, and then all the illustrations and things that we've got in progress right now that are not here yet. We're updating some of the illustrations and we're providing new ones as needed. Some of the sign types that are in there that are defined, we're going to have a little illustration saying this is what that is, height illustrations and things like that. So we would provide that next time. But I wanted to give you a chance to just see it clean without all the little strike throughs and underlining and all the other little markings that indicate new content or changed content. And I think we probably still have a couple of definitions to eliminate too. There are a few that just aren't defining any terminology that we're actually using in the sign ordinance. But that's kind of the last thing we do is we look at the definitions and say, all right, what do we actually need? If you'd like me to address anything or summarize anything, I can. Otherwise, if you had any comments or questions, I would be happy to entertain them. And I do have one discussion item that I'd like to raise. That's a decision I'd like you guys to make tonight.
Most of the things that are in here are in our existing ordinances, correct?
Generally speaking, yes. In terms of the sizes that are permitted, the amount of signage we're permitting here, yeah, typically that stuff is in the sign ordinance already. This is a reflection of what's there. It's reorganized. Of course, but we haven't gone to any lengths to change sizes that are permitted or the amount of signage. The way signage is distributed on a building might be a little different because you don't necessarily have to have it all in one sign. You could have two signs that collectively met the maximum area. Yeah, it's very similar to what you have right now in terms of the amount of signage that's permitted.
And a lot of this is enforced by administration.
That's correct.
I see quite a few signs around town, just the cardboard wire signs sticking in places that I don't think they belong. It's starting to look like a yard sale around town.
Sure.
And I don't see anybody ask them to take them down. I haven't been around town I haven't been past the old port lately. I don't know if his roof's still up or not. He puts it up for the 4th of July, and
It's still there.
I think we decided we're just going to go and kindly ask him if he could take it down.
I think that's one of those things we discussed about holiday displays.
Yeah.
It references 4th of July.
Yeah, we have trouble regulating holiday displays for a variety of First Amendment reasons, but you can't ask. You can say, your display has been up for a long time and we're hearing about
We don't
it.
have a specific amount of time that it can stay up.
Not for a holiday display, no.
Okay, so we should nicely ask him to
Yeah,
remove it.
it could be mentioned that your holiday display is expired. It's well past the holiday in question, and people were taking note.
And Joe, is there anything legally, I know you're not an attorney, but legally that we could put a frame around? Typically, a holiday might last up to 30 days, or Is there anything that we can do to kind of put parameters on a typical holiday?
Unfortunately, that's really hard to do, if it's possible at all. I could ask Rennis what he thinks, but everything I've ever been told by municipal attorneys is don't mess with holiday displays in your ordinance. Now, can a holiday display that's left up well past its prime trigger other concerns like blight? Yes, it can. It's kind of an extreme case. But yes, you could potentially find yourself in a situation like that where you actually would have something to enforce on. But I have always been cautioned not to try to regulate holiday displays in a zoning ordinance.
And is it because of the language component of holiday displays, of like not necessarily reading the language to determine the type of sign, or because anybody could claim a holiday for almost anything, right?
It's a First Amendment thing. It is a speech thing, and also in the case of some holidays, a freedom of religion thing. But yeah, I can ask how far we might be able to go, what your attorney thinks of that. But as I said, everything I've ever been told by municipal attorneys is just don't go there. It's a minefield, and you're probably going to get sued and lose.
This is one of my questions to Joe when this came up, because I'm aware of some of the things that we have in Clawson, and he said I've asked several municipal attorneys and have been told stay away from that on a holiday. But if it becomes tattered or windblown, then we've got blight.
Do you think we have enough within the parameters of the ordinance to address the potential specific blight of a sign in specific, or do you feel like we need that more?
We do. We have a maintenance section that requires a certain amount of maintenance of a sign, and if we see that a sign is not being maintained in accordance with that section, or if someone complains about that on a particular sign, we absolutely can use that section to enforce.
And obviously, these ordinances, for the residents at home, this only refers to commercial property. They can leave their Christmas lights on their house
Yeah, exactly.
year-round.
Yep.
We're not going to have a problem with that.
Yep.
That's not encouraging.
Right.
Don't encourage it, but
Candy
yeah,
cane on the front door in July.
some people like doing that. Anyone else have any questions?
Just a couple for me.
Sure.
So I wondered about, last we talked, you seemed open to maybe dropping language about a moratorium deadline or something like that. I saw the 5-year in there. As I recall the conversation going last time, we wanted to talk to the city attorney actually about it and just see, what legal basis do we have, and are we exposing the city to litigation if we actually go all out with it and say, it's been 2 months or it's been 5 years or whatever the time ends up being in the language, that your sign's still there, it's not compliant, its assessed value in our mind is $2, and it's not, it's got to come down, or minimum $500 fine plus legal fees and all this other stuff. So we're putting an established business, that's probably of the impression that they're grandfathered into it in a position where now they've got to take on an expense that they maybe didn't have planned or can afford. So don't want to sort of defend blight. There's a need for the city to maintain its aesthetic look. But is there a way to maybe graduate to that in a secondary step after this draft? Or after this adoption, even.
Well, so the time frame, like we had in the last version of the sign ordinance, has been removed at this point. We don't have a deadline for the removal of non-conforming signs anymore. What we've done is we've shifted to a structure where when you are making modifications, that's when things have to be brought into conformity. And I think the deadline, more so than a legal issue, it's a political issue that if you've got the deadline in your ordinance and then it's not followed through on, as happened last time, then it's mooted in the ordinance, but it's still there, and it kind of undermines the ordinance. So we took that out because it was just felt during the last discussion that it's very unlikely that we're going to force a bunch of businesses by a certain deadline to remove their signs at their own expense and put in a new one. And there's a lot of reasons for that. You know, I mean, it is a lot to ask, right? But what we have done is we've strengthened the circumstances and clarified the circumstances under which a sign would need to be brought into conformance with the sign ordinance. And we put in language that gets us around the noted recent issue of, you know, they'll do the building signs but not the pole signs, so that they can keep the pole sign, and then the pole sign's kind of looking a little ragged, but the building signs are brand new. If they're coming in for a sign permit, they're going to be looking at all the signage on the site. So I think it's stronger than it was, but we don't have the time frame where there's like a drop dead deadline where everybody's supposed to have done this, because we know that we're not going to be in the business of forcing people to do it. So let's not go there this time. And you know, over time there are going to be fewer and fewer of these non-conforming signs. So I think that the urgency of a deadline, you know, diminishes over time as well, because you're just not dealing with as many old non-conforming signs. We've had, even in the last few years, quite a few old non-conforming signs have gone away. So, or at least the non-conformity's been reduced, and you know, a lot of those have gone for variances, and they wind up being less non-conforming, but they're still a little non-conforming.
Any further questions?
I actually have one. Do you feel like that was explained well enough? I can appreciate that. I don't think it's fair to impose so many costs onto just everybody. But I was wondering if I didn't, and maybe I missed it over, the historical definition of like a historically relevant sign. I know we kind of spoke briefly about that. Were you able to kind of narrow that down and put parameters on that? Did you maybe talk to the attorney to see if he felt like that was clean enough to not really see any type of ramifications from one person deciding that theirs was historically relevant versus the city deciding that one might be more relevant than another?
Right. The way it's written in here, it's landmark signs. Item H at the bottom of page 13 is where it starts if you're trying to find it in the document. So what we have is it's similar to like a special land use or a planned unit development, where there's a certain amount of discretion on the part of the Planning Commission to decide whether or not the criteria that the sign has to meet are met. So it gives an intent statement. It says what we're trying to do. We're recognizing that in some cases it may be desirable to approve signage that doesn't otherwise fit the regulations of the ordinance in order to enhance or preserve the character of a district, recognize the history of a given site, or create a community landmark. And therefore, it's the intent of the city to permit landmark signs in certain limited circumstances as follows, and then it gives the process. So landmark signs are all subject to site plan review and approval by the Planning Commission. And that can happen either during a larger site plan approval process or just in relation to the landmark sign. So if they've got an existing site and they want to, let's say they find some historical photos of the site and they say, oh, wow, there was this really cool sign here before and it was really distinctive and I can't believe that's gone now. Let's try to bring that back. They can come to the city with a site plan for that sign and show us the design and show us those photos, here's the history behind it. And ask for us to approve a sign that we otherwise wouldn't be able to approve. So this happens in a few places in the city. It's within the CC and CMD districts, so city core, or within 100 feet of the boundary of the city, at the corner of Crooks Road and 14 Mile, the corner of 14 Mile and Rochester, the corner of Crooks Road and Maple, and the corner of Maple Road and Main Street, or on South Main Street as you're coming into the city within 100 feet of the city limit. So it's really at the gateways to the city and then within our city center. And then the Planning Commission has criteria for approval. So the Planning Commission shall not approve a proposed landmark sign unless it makes an affirmative finding that the sign will not be injurious to the public, health, safety, and welfare, and that a minimum of one of the following criteria for review are met. And the first one is that the sign preserves, revives, or restores a documented historical element of the site. So you have to have documentation that here's the history of the site. Or it enhances the municipal identity of the city of Clawson or provides a gateway feature for the city or its downtown. So in that case, it would be speaking to, welcome to Clawson, you're now in Clawson, Clawson welcomes you, Clawson cares, whatever the person wanted to say on it, you would have to agree that that met that standard. And that is acceptable from a legal standpoint.
So the historical relevance doesn't have to be pertaining to that element, though, right?
To the second one? To
Yeah,
the
right, like
municipal
the
identity.
identity of Clawson. Like the historical relevance can be outside of that, and
It
then you
can.
can bridge that gap with meeting the historical, with meeting the identity of Clawson.
Right.
And does that mean that they can forego other objectives in terms of, size? Are we going to look at a scale of that? Like, okay, you can do it, but letters can only be, 12 inches versus 72 inches, or like, and if I'm asking too many detailed questions,
that's
that's fine
fine.
too. We can address that as it comes, but is that something that we want? Do you think it would be important to hone down on a scale of relevance or not?
Well, I think what you possibly could do, if I'm understanding your question correctly, is within these this subsection here, we could explicitly note that the Planning Commission may place conditions on its approval of a landmark sign that meet, the goals of, and we could even refer to the goals of special land use approval in the zoning ordinance or something along those lines. We could include language that's very clear that this is a special type of approval and the Planning Commission can place conditions on it that are intended to meet certain goals or possibly just the intent of the sign ordinance. So if you did feel it was too big or just completely out of scale with what's there now, the intent of the sign ordinance is pretty clear that it's looking not to have a cluttered visual environment, that we're looking to control the scale of signs. So if you were to place conditions on it, say, okay, you can do it, but not that big. I think those goals, that intent statement would be relevant. And if we're explicit about it under landmark signs, that would be something that you could do and that people would have to expect when they came in for one of these things.
Okay. Well, I can say I like the component of the special land use because that also brings public comment, right?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. So I like that aspect of it. I'm just confused by how someone might, of course I'm making assumptions on the extreme cases, right? But someone might say, look, there was this chicken here, right? Or, so I'm gonna put a chicken on my sign that looks like that chicken, but I'm gonna make it this big and do whatever I want with it. Like, I just didn't know if we were covering those spaces. Joan, I don't know if, you look like you have something to say.
No, I was just gonna ask Joe, for the landmark signs, which are at entrances of the city and fish stuff, would they have to somehow mirror a historic sign?
Not necessarily. They could be new. Maybe somebody could come up with something kind of cool and innovative, and we
Would
could
it
say,
have
"Wow,
some-
all right."
Some element of mirroring a landmark sign to say this is a landmark sign. We're showing pictures of a historic sign. We're mirroring that idea. Would they have to show that?
Well, yeah, I mean, you could do a sign that specifically spoke to the history of a site, but we've got a second criterion that you could meet that's more of a landmark municipal identity criterion. So you wouldn't necessarily have to reflect history in one of those municipal identity signs. It could be that you've got a design in mind that is kind of fresh and different, and it works,
Well, yeah, that's what I was kind of referring to is like, is there the potential of like, and I'm not picking on, our breakfast place with the chicken. That's relevant in my mind. But if you say, I'm going to mimic the chicken because that has historic reference to a site, or maybe it has to be the specific site, let's say. But then you can does that give them free rein to kind of do whatever they want with their sign? Or does that keep them within a parameter of that historic relevance? You know what and I don't know if that's explicit or not.
Yeah, I mean, I think you'd be within your rights to say, all right, cool chicken. It references the chicken that used to be here, but this chicken is 20 feet tall and that one was 4 feet tall. We can't have the 20-foot tall one. We're going to do a 4-foot tall one. And that would be your condition of approval, is that.
Or
this
just
thing
because
has to
they
be-
reference a chicken on their new sign, but their new sign doesn't meet ordinance, but they reference the historic sign, does that give them free rein to expand what is compliant under what's now going to be the new sign? Do you understand what I'm asking?
You wouldn't be obligated to approve a, like, let's say they're working on that building where the chicken, and they are working on it right now, of course, but we were aware of what they're doing there. Let's just take the chicken as an example. So, got the chicken for whatever reason, lightning strike or something, goes away. And person buys it, always love the chicken. They want to put a chicken on their sign to honor the history of the site. And they're proposing to put up a sign that's, 6 times the size of a sign that they would normally be allowed to have on the building. You'd be within your rights to say, no, make it a compliant sign that's the size the sign needs to be. You wouldn't necessarily have to allow them to go crazy with the size of it.
Is there a difference between landmark and historic?
I think historic is a subset of landmark.
And historic is technically 50 years or older, correct?
That
Okay.
helps define it.
Yeah, I think so
Yeah,
too.
for something to be declared a historic landmark or historic property, it has to be over 50 years old, yeah.
And the sign up at 14 and Crooks at the little shopping center there, there's a sign out on the corners. I don't know if it says welcome to Clausen or if it just says
does.
Clausen.
Yeah.
Did the city put that up or was that put up by the businesses?
Developer.
I think this is a developer,
For
yeah.
some reason I thought that they did, and I was surprised that they did and that the city didn't
Part
do
of
it.
the site plan.
Yeah.
The other signs at the other intersections, those are city-owned signs, I would assume. I think we maintain them.
Yeah, those are city-owned.
Okay.
And of course, the city can put in whatever welcome signs it wants because it's a municipality. Okay, valuable feedback and discussion there.
Joe, I've got a question. I think, so I know I wasn't here at the last meeting, but during one conversation regarding illumination of the signs, I know previously there was discussion or talking points within within one of these drafts. I think it was identifying foot candles or lumens in terms of what the limits are. And I noticed that the criteria or the standard for illumination for these signs is quite different. And I just want to note that in a couple areas I read kind of along the same within the same spirit. You know, all on page 7, 9D, all illuminated signs shall be arranged. I'm sorry, 9E. In no event shall light from an illuminated sign shine on adjacent property which is used for residential purposes. And then above, so as not to interfere with the vision of persons on adjacent thoroughfares and properties. And I guess my question is, or my concern is, how do we enforce that? Because in my mind, if with this language alone, this is one code enforcement person versus property owner saying, well, this doesn't interfere with anything, versus code enforcement saying, well, yes, it does, because it's 100-foot candles, and so it's obviously too bright. And then the property owner coming back and saying, well, nowhere does it say 100-foot candles is too bright. In my opinion,
Sure, right.
it's fine. And so I guess how does that work in terms of, evening, sun is down, we have illuminated signs out. How do we determine what's appropriate?
Okay, that's a good question. So, digital signs, where they're regulated in here, do have a brightness limit that's related to the level of ambient light. Other signs don't. Where you might run into problems with brightness would be on internally illuminated signs, like a box sign. When you've got a bulb shining at a sign, it can only reflect so much light. So I don't know how many sign ordinances I've ever seen that actually have like an illuminance limit.
And maybe
on
this is not an
internally
issue.
illuminated signs.
I'm just
Yeah.
imagining that it could be the one-off business
Right.
that just has a sign that's just too bright and.
Sure. I guess with the language as it is, it would be complaint driven. It would be people in the houses up the street or something saying this sign is absurdly bright. We need it dimmed. And the city could then investigate that. I'm trying to think of a sign ordinance I've ever seen that has an actual illuminance standard for internally lit signs. Like in terms of, it wouldn't be foot candles, it would be, light has all kinds of complicated terminology around it, and some of them reflect how much light is shining on a surface, and some of them reflect how much light is being emitted from a source, and I always mix them up. Foot candles is how much is shining on a surface, and nits, or there's another word for it, candelas, is how much is being emitted from a source. So one thing that we could potentially do is adopt the ambient light standard for digital signs into the illumination standards, so that if we do have a problem with an internally illuminated sign that's excessively bright, we could point to that standard and say this sign has to be dimmed because it's not meeting the ambient or the relationship that it needs to have to the ambient light in the area. It's a standard that's recommended for digital signs by IATSE, the internet. They're cited in here. I can never remember what IATSE stands for. But anyway, it's a national lighting association. And I don't see why we couldn't apply that as a measurable standard for an internally illuminated sign, that if something ever was to be unusually bright or out of control, we would then have something to say, all right, let's get it at least down to this level.
I can imagine living next to Ford Field and wondering this huge light that isn't a sign going up into the sky and living next to it annoying me.
Yep.
Not that we probably will have such a thing here, but I think it'd be nice to accommodate such a restriction.
Do we have availability for equipment to test these things, that we can actually see what they're putting out? We went through this before in the noise problems. If a bar decides to have a party outside, the noise level was too high. Then we found out, how far away do you have to hear it? And we don't really have a machine that tells you that.
Right. So, yeah, there's a decibel meter for noise. They measure dBA, which is a slightly different measurement of sound than dB, but they're similar. And then for light, there are multiple different types of light meters. And one of the reasons that we like to use a foot candle standard is that is an inexpensive light meter that anyone can pick up and use. There's just a really low learning curve for using one of those meters. There are also Illuminance meters that measure, I don't know exactly what the details are, but they measure something different, and they're a lot more expensive and a lot more complicated to learn to use. So that's one of the reasons that sign ordinances and lighting ordinances tend to favor the less expensive, less complicated light meter, so that pretty much anyone can pick it up and go out there and measure it and say,
So
all
we
right,
will be
this
able
is
to
good.
enforce this ordinance
Yeah.
with what we have.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, and is there really, I mean, like, I don't expect that you've actually gone out and tested, but like, if it's disruptive, is there that much of a difference in because we spoke about this, right? The foot, what did you call it?
Foot candles.
Okay, foot candles, like, in terms of, I guess it's subjective, right? Whether or not there's a huge difference in the light permitting versus how you measure it. I don't know.
So what we try to do is we try to set a standard for foot candles that is unlikely to be obnoxious, basically. And then if someone is bothered by lights that are next door, we can use that standard to measure, whether or not there's an obvious problem. And if there's like a glare issue or something, we have a house side shielding standard that can be used, even on an old light fixture. If there's a nuisance problem that's being created by a light fixture, let's say you back up to, like a large industrial site over on Crooks Road, and they've got old light fixtures and they're really bright because they just put new LEDs in them or something, and they used to have those sodium vapors that are a lot different looking. And all of a sudden, the thing is just shining like crazy in your backyard. We can invoke our nuisance standards and make them put house side shielding on there or something like that.
So you think between the two, there's a fair balance of being able to get a hold of light nuisance, right?
Right.
Like that we don't
There
have
is.
to overcomplicate and over technology. Like,
Right.
I mean, what are we doing to code enforcement too, right? Like, we're going to have them out there, at 10 p.m.
Right.
Do you feel like it's really enough?
I
scope to-
do feel like, and I'm fine with putting the ambient light standard and the illumination standards overall. I think that's fine to give us something to measure. But yeah, I do think that there's enough in there. Certainly, there's more than a lot of sign ordinances have, and there's the same amount as a lot of sign ordinances that I think are really effective and well administered around the state. So, yeah, I can pop the ambient standard in there, and I think we're good. We've got something to measure if we do have a problem, but we've also got the kind of general descriptive standards that allow us to respond to lights that are a nuisance for whatever reason they might be a nuisance. Could just be that someone kicked the little fixture that was shining on the sign, and now it's pointing in the wrong direction, and all they have to do is go,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, most of those cases won't be coming in front of us, they'll be coming in front of code enforcement.
Yeah,
It'd be
right.
still unfortunate if they had to go
By
through
resident.
code enforcement to turn a light bulb around too, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, what a pain. Yeah.
Things like that do happen.
Code enforcement's happy with the easy ones.
Oh, I'm sure, yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah, right, exactly. One thing that I wanted to ask you this evening, and Joan pointed this out when we were talking, we were going through the draft together. So in the CR district, at the bottom of page 11 of that memo, signage in the CR district. So the CR district is around the edge of downtown, and it's meant to accommodate like a house that might transition from being a residence to being like an insurance office or something, like low-key business like that. This standard allows them to have a wall sign and a freestanding sign, both 12 square feet. Do we think it should be an either-or standard, where they either get the little wall sign or the little yard sign, or do we think having both is reasonable in that context? We're talking about like Bowers, Jefferson Street, primarily houses on these streets. Do we think it should be an either or? They either get the sign that's freestanding or they get the wall sign, or do we think they should get both?
Can you tell me where you're at on the
Bottom of page 11,
11?
item 4.
Thanks.
Signage in the CR district.
Commercial residential.
Yeah, so it's at the, like I said, it's at the edges of downtown. Jefferson Street and Bowers are the two that come to mind that have that zoning. High Street in Florence, that neighborhood, a lot of that has that zoning in it. And it does allow for that, conversion of a house to a very limited set of businesses. So given that it is residential, Joan's thought was, well, should they just get one or the other? They either can have the little wall sign or they can have the little freestanding sign. Do they really need two? Small lots, you're probably going to be parking right in front of the place or in the driveway or something. Do they really need two signs? And I tended to agree with her when she brought it up. I was like, oh yeah, maybe they don't need both. Maybe it could just be one or the other.
So would we leave the choice to them as to which one or the other?
Yeah, that's the
Because-
idea. They could choose, okay, I want the sign out in the yard or I want the sign up on the building.
Because would there be a conformity preference towards it being on a house versus in the lawn, maybe, possibly? Or is that not something that you saw as a concern?
I mean, it's whatever your preference is. If you have a strong preference for it only being on the house and not allowing a freestanding sign there, that would be something that we could implement. The way we've got it set up right now, we've got standards for both. If we went to an either-or standard, they would be allowed to choose. Okay, I'm going to do the one in the yard, or I'm going to do the one on the house, one or the other. But if you did have a strong preference for one or the other and would rather not see its counterpart, that's also something we could do.
I guess I look to Joan for that kind of, you know what it looks like in the
When we
day-to-day.
When we talked about core residential,
Mm-hmm.
we talked about, these are residential neighborhoods that are gonna now allow to have a small business in there. And so rather than, not to disparage rental homes, because I have them, but not to disparage those, but rather than a rental home that is constantly changing, if you allowed a small business to move in there, an attorney's office, an insurance office, something where you've got an employee and yourself working, and it's in the home, and the home has to continue looking like the neighborhood, and you would put out a shingle. So So, and you're gonna maintain it because it's your business, it's gonna look nice, but it's still gonna conform to the neighborhood. So it's still gonna have that neighborhood feel to it. So should it have 2 signs out or should it have 1? And do you want it to be one or the other?
Well, I agree with the one aspect of things, but in terms of conformity, are you saying that it's limited to those 2 streets, Joe, or that it has the possibility of, are those the only 2 areas that were, like, that it has that possibility for?
There are a handful of other
Yeah.
streets.
Okay.
Like I said, parts
Because
of
in terms
Florence
of
and
conformity, one might argue that if you, that's a hard thing, right? Because you want the business people to be able to find it, but also in terms of conformity, strictly residential wise, I would think that having it on the home strictly would be more conformed to a residential neighborhood.
So it's the portion of Broadacre that backs up to like the old Burger King site and Leon and Lulu and all that. Jefferson, Bowers, parts of Florence and High that are just north of 14 Mile, and then a tiny little bit of Pear just south of downtown. Over by the yeah, exactly, kind of south of Old Port and House of Optical.
So a small area, right, those residential homes right around the downtown.
Yeah.
I think I would lean towards one or the other, not both.
Sure.
And my preference would be to mount it on the building itself. However, if you've got an older house with big trees out in front, it's going to be hard to see that sign. So the yard sign or the lawn sign would be better for them.
Can we put further restrictions on the yard sign to meet the conformity of a residential neighborhood in terms of, like, maybe, let's say there's brick homes, like to make it congruent with the actual neighborhood, or is that getting too messy?
I mean, you could maybe limit its height, and it's 12 square feet if it's on the building and 8 square feet if it's in the yard or something like that. So it's a slightly smaller sign. There are certainly ways you could do it, and it's mostly just a matter of like changing the numbers in the text that's already there if you wanted to do that. So it would be kind of a disincentive to do the lawn sign as opposed to the building sign.
Well, then, not to think too much again into things, but the wall sign, if we're going to convert back to a home, then there's that, right? But, and also, is there the opportunity for neighbors in the way that this was written? It didn't jump out to me as if this would be something that would come into mailing the neighbors around that property so that they can weigh in on.
No,
Okay.
there's not a public hearing process.
For many years, my accountant worked out of his home on the 2nd story. I just needed to know the address. And I think now with Google, if you're that small of a business, you're gonna know where you're going.
You are, I agree, but you also want to give them the right to be able to, like, put their sign too, right?
Sure,
I mean, even
absolutely.
sometimes, driving to see a house, I'm like, well, they didn't have a for sale sign in the, but Google told me it was there, right? And so you question. So it can be a nuisance for people that are trying to visit that business. Again, I know you said it was small business, probably 1 employee, but
They're small,
Yeah.
yeah. It's a residential home with not a lot of parking. So it doesn't have a parking lot in back, so it's still a small business or a little artisan business. So even if you have a light pole out front and you put your sign off of that, the whole idea of putting your shingle out.
And I mean, I guess that's another thing is that you could not allow the freestanding sign to be directly illuminated. It's already not allowed to be internally lit the way this is written, but you could say, well, yeah, you could put it on a light post,
especially
but
if
you're not going to shine a light
we're limiting
directly at
hours
it. Yeah, they're gonna
those
have
in-home
limited hours,
occupations,
yeah.
right? Like, I would think that that is a good idea too.
Sure.
Joe, does the master plan speak to any of this, or could that give us any insight?
The downtown master plan laid out kind of the idea behind that district, and then the district itself was patterned on what was described in the master plan. So there are even form-based standards for it in the zoning ordinance for the CR district. So yeah, I mean, basically what's being described here, not internally lit, small, subtle, matching the home in terms of colors, materials, graphic design, et cetera. That's really what was intended by the master plan. And then when you look in the zoning ordinance at the list of permitted uses and things, that's also all what was described in the master plan. And that CR district wasn't something I think anybody expected to come out of that master plan process. We had a set of workshops where that really kind of came out of the conversation, that, you know, in terms of an appropriate way to allow certain things to happen out around the edge of downtown, but not wholesale change. That's really where that idea came from for that district. So, yeah, I mean, in terms of modifying this language, I think, you know, what was just discussed, making the freestanding sign a little less appealing from the perspective of the business owner, and then allowing them to choose which one they want.
I wasn't trying to make it less appealing.
Well, to them.
Well, yeah, I mean, I wasn't trying to sway them one way or another, but I do think that there should be conformity to the neighborhood for sure.
Sure. But yeah, smaller and shorter is going to be more in character with the neighborhood.
Yeah,
You know.
I think that's great.
I think a freestanding sign that, you know, if you're the neighbor across the street and you look at the house, and it looks like a house because if you imagine you're the neighbor across the street from the house and you're looking at it, you wake up in the morning, you open your curtains and you look at that, it looks like Las Vegas, it's not good. If it looks almost from your point of view, from your angle of view, you don't even see a sign, that's amazing. And there's some signs that could be done where, you know, it's perpendicular to traffic, so traffic can see it, but the oncoming house doesn't see it, and the next door neighbor also doesn't see it. And about illuminated signs, if there's like two HID floodlights, you know, looking at that, probably a next door neighbor has to see that light, you know.
Sure.
So an illuminated light from inside may be less offensive than the floodlights that would invariably have to be used. So timing for the lighting to make sure people aren't up at night, you know,
Yeah.
worrying about it. And
I think the safest thing for a freestanding sign in that district is just not to allow it to be illuminated. If it's freestanding,
yeah,
it's just, you know, just don't illuminate it. And that's, I mean, you see these kinds of things all over the place. If you go up to Lexington or something, you know, there's little houses that have been converted to business. They don't have illuminated signs in their yard, so that's a reasonable standard.
If we request that they put vegetation around, that might slow them down a bit too.
Sure.
Oh, we got a new Glen. No.
You're gonna have to mow the
kidding.
grass around it, but if it's a plant in, you know.
Yeah. Yeah,
well, I support that too. I think one sign is better than two, and anything that helps it look like a house, not a very strange house with a big sign on the side of the siding or something.
Okay.
Yeah, so we're kind of in agreement, it's either or, it's not.
Sounds like it.
Thanks for Joan for making that suggestion.
All right, thanks, guys. That is modifications I can make.
One other
Anything
thing,
else?
it was my understanding in Clausen Sorry?
All the way over. You can move up to the,
I have a feeling.
I have a better view like this, that's why.
I feel like we're being judged by you over there, though.
You are.
it's like a job, it's a job interview. You guys are interviewing.
You're not up to standard yet.
I'm working on it.
Well, just wait. I think it's going to get interesting for you. So it was my understanding that, obviously the situation with recreational marijuana sales in Clawson is, I think, ubiquitously known in this group. But it was my understanding that we wouldn't allow, dispensary type signs or big, green crosses and that type of thing. And that language, wasn't in the original ordinance because not too long ago it was unthinkable to be selling marijuana on the street. But as it happens, it is now. So where would the sign ordinance that is proposing be able to tack in something like that?
So if we were to permit those types of businesses, now we do have to permit the caregivers, and they're not allowed to have signs. That's in the zoning ordinance. And if we were to allow the other types of businesses to come in, signage for those businesses or lack of ability to have signage for those businesses would be addressed in whatever regulation we wrote to accommodate those businesses.
Not
So
the
it
sign
wouldn't necessarily have to be done in the sign ordinance because the state statute is clear that we can do it as part of our regulations for the use.
And just to clarify, they're also not allowed in the residential area, so the
Right,
previous
right.
conversation does not apply, right?
Right, yeah, exactly, yeah.
So,
Yeah. And interestingly, on that subject, in a lot of parts of the state of Michigan, the marijuana industry is actually struggling right now because it grew too fast.
Yeah.
Like all of a sudden they were everywhere, and not all of them have survived. And there's a major market correction occurring right now in that industry. So I think you're going to see a slowdown in initiatives and other things. If there's a part of the state that's not as served as others, you'll probably still see the initiatives there. But right now, we're in the middle of a bunch of communities that are allowing it. And I don't see, we didn't have the initiatives come back this year. I'm not sure it's going to come back for a while.
there was a way oversaturation.
Yeah, oh,
I mean,
yeah,
even
it
just
did.
Hazel Park is
Yeah.
way oversaturated, right? Like,
Yeah.
how many are in Hazel Park?
It was like all of a sudden you
I-
open the doors to Michigan and just a big puff of smoke.
Yeah. It's like the gold, I've heard many compare it to a gold rush, right?
Yeah, it
Which it
was.
was similar in
Sure.
how the market will adjust and react to it.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
there's been a major slowdown in that industry, and it's not as though there won't be more businesses opening, but it's going to go through a couple of kind of turbulent years here where there's some major market correction, and a lot of the ones that opened will go out of business. Some of the ones that survive will probably consolidate to capture whatever market share they had. You might have a few new players come in, but right now it's dominated by large companies that were already doing it in other states, quite frankly. It didn't really have the local entrepreneur angle that I think it was expected to have when it was originally passed back in 2008 or whatever.
Which
Yeah,
is-
it's been kind of interesting to watch over the last couple of months.
Yes, it has. And it's one of the main contentions there is that it really was not the local entrepreneur
Right.
that it was intended to be.
And it was kind
Yeah.
of structured to make it hard because
Yeah.
you needed a certain amount of capitalization and things like that, and a little guy just wasn't going to be able to.
Especially the
to do that.
caregivers, once they were done with them.
You
Yeah, yeah.
know. Any other questions or things on this before we move on to the next item? All right, thank you very much. That was
I think we're good.
good conversation. It was nice to be able to kind of hone in on just a couple issues and really hammer them out. So,
Now you want to move on to agenda item number 8, additional zoning ordinance discussion?
Yes, so, got a couple things in here. This would be the memo titled miscellaneous zoning items. It starts with accessory buildings. So and Joan can attest to this, we've had a spike in the number of people requesting to construct pole barn buildings as accessory buildings recently. These are extremely common in some of the other communities that I work for that are more rural. People, they're inexpensive buildings, fairly easy to construct, and they can be just about any size. They could be 200 square feet. They could be 3,000 square feet. It just depends on what you need and what you want. And if you drive through, the townships in northern Macomb County or something, you will see massive pole barns everywhere because everybody needs one for their boat and ATV and RV and whatever else they've got. A tractor because you've got a 6,000 square foot front lawn. So we've been having more requests for people to build these in Clawson recently. Some of them are proposed as garages, others are proposed as storage buildings. So currently, we permit the following accessory buildings on residential properties. You can have not more than one private garage and one storage shed. And storage shed is actually defined in our ordinance as a storage building not exceeding 200 square feet. You get your garage, you get your shed. The way our language reads, if you get the garage, you get the storage shed, and the garage can be attached or detached, there's no other detached accessory building. The ordinance doesn't contain an explicit compatibility standards for accessory buildings. Historically, it's been interpreted to require accessory buildings to be in harmony with the neighborhood. Couple questions that this raises. So, one, are we interested in being more explicit about a compatibility standard for accessory buildings? Might not necessarily exclude pole barn construction, but it might speak to what the exterior appearance of a pole barn would be if it were constructed. Whether it's stick-built or a pole barn type building, a certain appearance standard would have to be met by an accessory building. And I don't know that we would necessarily include the 200 square foot shed in that because those are things that people are going to Home Depot and buying, and they're, you're probably not going to be able to regulate that. People aren't getting permits for those, and they don't need to. But as far as the main accessory building, your garage or whatever, a more explicit compatibility and appearance standard could be helpful for the building department when it's issuing permits and trying to assess whether or not a building fits into the neighborhood. And then the other question I had is that when you have an attached garage, do you just get the shed? Because right now, the way our ordinance is written, it's really, you get the shed. And because you get a garage and a shed, right? And it doesn't speak to whether or not the garage is attached. Should a house get a second accessory building, a detached accessory building when the garage is attached? That was the other question.
Joe?
It can't exceed the 35%.
Yeah, you still would be able to
Right,
see,
of
yeah.
the
right.
impermeable,
Yeah.
impervious surfaces. Question, we're only addressing the aesthetic of a pole barn because
Yeah.
there's a lot more to a pole barn than the aesthetic, right? Like,
Oh, yeah.
and when you talk about pole barn in the same way that you would talk about an accessory building, which is easily also, in my mind, an accessory dwelling, there.
Yeah, we can't do those here, but yeah.
Okay, right. I would hope not, because there's a vastly different standard of building, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Mainly in the footings.
Yep.
And then also, with the potential of rodent and other things, I think that there might be more to consider than just the aesthetics of it.
Mm-hmm.
the use of it, and I don't know if I'm prying too deep into it, but like the use of it, like, look, if you're just gonna store a boat in there, that's different than converting it into an apartment, or, you know, so there's a lot more that goes into an accessory building that may be or may not be converted at some point in time, and I think that might be worth considering.
We're getting a lot, let's just go with 3 lately, that are pole barn construction for people who want storage or an extra garage. So none of them are dwellings, because you can't do that.
And they're the size of, like, they're not 2-story, right?
Well,
So,
they can only be the 14-foot height. They can't go
Okay.
any higher than that. It's
Right.
the construction. So they look like, but the look is a pole barn look. It's a barn look. It's a more rural type of look.
Yeah, they're
because
coming
right
in
now-
with the corrugated metal siding,
Yeah,
basically.
because
yeah.
right now, construction costs and materials are up, so these you can get more easily. So we don't have anything that says, oh, no, you can't have a pole barn, but what we do have in the ordinance is it says that it has to look like the neighborhood. Well, what does that mean? Do we say, okay, it has to have more windows and shutters? So, yes, it's pole barn construction, but it looks more like a garage. And that's kind of what we're looking at, because we're at odds with it in the building department, is how do we say what meets the neighborhood? A garage, typically, the way it's built, we know what that looks like. Pole barn, which definitely has that more rural look, how do we make sure that looks like the neighborhood? And somebody isn't saying, somebody just put up a barn next to me.
yeah, well, that's hard too, right? Because especially when it comes to roofing, who are we to say what they can line the roof with, right? Like, are we to say that we can't do metal on a roof? We don't have anything in there.
No, we don't have anything that says you
I
can't
don't
do a
know a
standing
lot
seam
about
roof, yeah.
the life and longevity of metal roofs, but from what I've heard, that they last pretty far along asphalt, right? Like,
Yeah.
so those are complicated questions.
Yeah.
I don't think, just my first reaction would be that I don't think the city should be able to say, no, you can't do metal
Yeah.
roofs. You have to do, right, we have to have standards, but like,
Right.
I don't know.
But to use words like compatible with the neighborhood leaves it open for the ZBA is going to go nuts.
Oh, yeah,
Right,
especially when
yeah,
it's a
exactly,
roof.
yeah,
You can't say
It
compatible with the
has to be-
neighborhood for a
It has
roof.
to be
Yeah.
tighter than that, size-wise.
It does,
or
yeah.
anything else. We have to-
Exactly. We need there to be something to work with that the building department can say, yes, this clearly falls within that category.
Right, we had a fellow years ago, that's back when I was on the ZBA, he's on 14 Mile, and he wanted to bump out the back of his garage and extend it. And his reasoning was he was in the window washing business, and he had really tall ladders, and that's the only place he could store them.
He needed a deeper garage for his
He
ladders,
gave us
that's
a good
what-
story, and we allowed him to do that. He bumped out the back of his garage, and I see quite a few guys around town, they'll bump out the back of the garage, add onto the back another 5, 10 feet.
Put a workbench in there or something.
I mean, it's dead
yeah.
space. I don't blame them for wanting to do that, right?
Sure.
What else are you going to do there?
But at that point, it still looks like a garage. Of
Yeah.
course, your garage is
Yeah.
bigger, but it still looks like a garage. It's
And I
not a
guess-
separate building.
Maybe that's the larger question here. You know, I noted you get a garage and a shed, and it doesn't speak to whether or not the garage is attached. So if you got a garage, if it's attached or detached, you get the shed in addition. If you've got an attached garage, should you be allowed to have another storage building?
Well, I think if it meets our surface criteria, then that should be enough, right? Because then we're kind of overpowering people's ability there a little.
It also can get to the point where a lot starts to look really crowded or.
So does too many lawn
Clutter.
ornaments. I mean,
So, you know, I mean, well, that's the thing. Lawn ornaments, you know, they come and go and they're small. 14-foot tall building.
Have you seen
is-
Clausen's, some of our lawn ornaments? really,
But
I just
yeah.
don't want to like be the
Right.
overbearing city, right?
Well, no, and neither do we, but recently, that, let's say you have somebody who doesn't have a garage, they've got a deep lot, and they're putting up a pole barn from within the setback, the 5-foot setback on this side and this side, and the whole length of it is pole barn, with just one big roll-up door. Does that meet the neighborhood?
So are you worried about from the streetscape, I don't think it's that offensive.
It's more the.
Me
over-
personally.
More the over the fence.
Right.
I guess you said
That's-
pole barn with a big roll-up door, and we don't provide a distinction when we permit structures that may look and feel like a garage, because that sounds like a garage.
Well, I guess you're getting into the size and the materials used and the giant,
Metal
a
fence.
a storage shed on steroids. That's all, it's that. Is that okay? And
They look horrible. I just no way to put it. They look horrible.
They do, but
so
who are we?
we're just looking for some criteria.
Yeah.
If it were to look like the neighborhood, you have to put a couple windows in it and maybe put shutters on it and say, oh, no, this looks like a garage, this fits the neighborhood. It corresponds to the buildings that are there, or is a big metal structure with one big door.
I agree.
Okay,
I just
I'm just
have a
saying-
hard time with saying, because usually when we talk about materials, and I'm not trying to argue with you, but it's just
a discussion.
my I guess it's really just hard to make an argument that like one material is better than another, because typically when we talk about materials, we talk about longevity of it, right? And that damn metal barn will be up there forever, probably, which you might not like, but like it's a good material. It's long lasting. So like what's where are we coming at this from, I guess? Like what angle are we going
How
to?
does it fit the neighborhood?
Yeah.
That's the question.
So
So from a building plan standpoint, when that's the standard, that this accessory building has to fit the neighborhood, does a big metal structure fit the neighborhood? Because they don't appear to. So
well,
we just-
aluminum
we
is
just need-
metal. I don't know. I don't have a pole barn, nor do I have a yard big enough for one. So
We're just asking the question. 'cause
Yeah.
Here it is.
it's a good question, but I wonder, define fit the neighborhood. Are we talking color? We're talking strictly materials where it has to be like, you can either side it with aluminum or side it with vinyl, but not corrugated metal.
Even if it were a big stick-built, completely vinyl sided to the size and looking like a barn with no other openings, is that fit? I don't know. Does that fit? We just need something from a building plan standpoint of what is the standard? As more of these come forward, what's the standard for it?
So in your opinion, and I hate to default to you all the time, but are you thinking what would feel more standard is like one window every 12 feet, or like, how do you feel like that would feel more congruent to a neighborhood?
Well, that's my own personal opinion, thinking that some sort of openings in it would make it feel a little more. But Laurent weighed in, he said they look terrible. What's your thought?
Yeah, it was-
That look like that. A barn doesn't belong in a city like that.
We might agree with that, but how do we, so we outlaw congregated metal pole barns?
Absolutely.
You're allowed a house, a garage, and a shed.
Shed.
No bigger than 200 square feet.
So right now, you can't even really do just a storage building that's over 200 square feet, because if it's not a garage or a shed, it's not permitted. So,
The pole barns are being brought forward as a storage storage or a garage.
Yeah,
I don't have a garage, so I'm putting this up.
right.
No, I get it. And I'm sure most of those people will probably use it as a garage, even though it doesn't have the proper fittings and building structure to it.
And then
Yep.
some of them don't even have a drive going back to it. It's a big storage area.
Yeah, so at a minimum, we could, every garage I'm aware of in the city looks and is clad the same as the building itself. So at a minimum, we could make that requirement, that the cladding of the, I'll call it a garage, would look like the other building. But I am surprised that there is such an interest in this, because I'm curious what percentage of lots in
They're
Clawson.
large enough, yeah.
Oh, there's lots of deep lots though, like on, like John M. and stuff. Like, can you imagine if you had, there's some deep lots, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah, especially over on the east side of town. Yeah, there are quite a few pretty large, especially very deep lots.
Okay.
That are probably historically barn houses,
So, yeah, some of them might
right?
be, yeah.
Ironically.
Not anymore. This is a suburb. At best, it's a suburb.
If you can show that there used to be a barn on your property, you're allowed to put another one up. Then,
Right.
And you can put up a sign.
Maybe we should make a,
They're like a
Yeah.
quarter the size of the original.
And remind me again, you're saying the existing ordinance prohibits it from being taller than 14 feet?
That's correct, yeah. To the
And-
midpoint between the peak and the eave.
Midpoint between the peak and the eave, so not even the overall structure. It
Yeah,
can
so
be
the-
taller than that.
The overall structure can be taller than that, but a
Okay.
small portion of it will
That's
be
quite
above
tall.
that.
And the non-permeable
Surface.
surface area of a lot is capped at what again?
35%.
Well, the building coverage is capped at 35%, and the impervious surface coverage is, well, it depends on the size of the lot. But up to 5,500 square feet is 70%, 5,501 to 8,000 square feet is 65%, and 8,001 or greater is 55%. But this would count as a building, so it would fall within that 35%.
Okay, so where I'm going with, remind me again. So let's take an example here of one of these three that you have recently been approached by. And this is not a 5,000 square foot lot. This is a 20,000 square foot lot or something, right?
I don't know exactly.
I don't know. These were not super large.
Yeah, they weren't that big, yeah.
A lot, single family, one story, no garage.
But they had 50 feet back behind them that they were thinking of putting this barn. So I'm
Something
having a
like
hard
that.
time believing in that example that we would comply with that permeability accommodation or requirement.
Well, it's the 35% maximum building coverage would probably be the one that they'd be bumping up against.
Yeah,
And they were fine.
and they were
Yeah,
fine.
in that case, yeah.
But
Yeah, I mean,
do we
so, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. Is there a way we can extend, would it help to extend the setbacks or no? Or do you think that's still just as offensive?
Well, let me say this.
I don't like barns.
Before we-
Don't look at me. Barns belong in the country, not in the cities where you're within walking distance to a downtown. No, they don't belong here. They just don't.
The two
If we
things-
can make, if we can make them look like a garage, okay.
So you're okay with the style of build, you strictly speak towards the aesthetic of it?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
Because barns look like barns.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I recognize the aesthetic issue completely, and I share some concerns that you do, I think, but from a practical perspective, we have a very real problem with flooding, and when there are strong rains, we have a big issue with giving that water someplace to go. We don't have a storm sewer. So if we have a neighbor who, next door to that neighbor, has a big pole barn in addition to a big driveway, in addition to a big house, and where is all that extra water going to go, you know?
To the neighbor.
There's no underground storage tank. It's probably going to go into the neighbor's basement if we're not careful. So I just wanted to put this on the table that we need to really,
If the grading's done correctly, it won't. Not that everybody always maintains the grading on their site as it was when it was approved, but,
Or any site.
Right.
But none of the things that we're talking about that have come before us have gone over that 35%.
yeah.
They're all they're within the standards. The only thing that we're looking at and asking for some guidance on is the design.
The appearance of the
the
building.
appearance, yeah.
Yeah.
Are you looking for a motion or just?
Not really a motion, because we'd have to bring you something for you to respond
Direction.
to, you know.
Well, I'm not a builder, but is there something to the aesthetic of a pole barn that leads to using metal? I know that prices of materials and things also weigh into it, but like, could you even vinyl side a pole barn? Or
Most of
like,
them can be
because of the
clad,
way
yeah.
that we construct a home, the way that we lay out the walls and things, like you can tap into things, right? Like, so is there even the possibility of aluminum siding a pole barn?
Well, I think you can put all kinds of different siding on pole barns. I mean, I've seen people put a brick,
Veneer.
it's escaping to me. Yeah, like a veneer on them before. I've seen people do all kinds of things with pole barns. So yeah, it is possible. You have to get the system on which you would hang the siding.
I would want to know more about the building code, I guess, of that particular, because it seems like if you did a brick veneer, again, I'm not a builder, but you could only go so high before the weight of that would start to
Yeah, it's always
eventually-
like a wainscot kind of thing where it's around the base, and I've never seen it go all the way up.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And you can almost purchase these like you do a shed.
Yeah, yeah. They-
Almost-
They're kits, yeah, you
Yeah,
can.
it's a kit, kind of. So your builder, it all comes to you.
Sorry, but you know, a lot of homes were built by Sears kits too. So
Sure they
yeah.
are.
They also had brick veneer and a lot of other things to the, and windows.
Yeah.
Yes, that's true. The windows is a big thing. I'm in agreement, but
Why don't we try to control the color, say you can put it up, but it has to be green, it's, in no way can it be red. It can't be red with white trim, you know?
I think
Anti-barn
Laurent would be
law.
good with that as long as it's green, right?
So I think what we
Bright
can
green?
do here is, I think we can bring you a few things for you to look at.
Yeah, we gotta
and
see
then
what other
see what
places
you're
are doing about
comfortable
this.
with, and go from there. We'll do that.
Joe, just to clarify, I know there's a lot of discussion around pole barns, and that maybe that's the source of kind of where this discussion originated from.
Sure.
But are we looking at providing, or are we trying to provide definition to accessory buildings for the city of Clawson, or trying to clarify how we want to control pole barns?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think whatever we do in terms of, you know, appearance or compatibility or matching or whatever standard we want to call it, standards, would probably apply to all accessory buildings other than those little sheds that you don't need a permit for. But then it would also necessarily govern pole barns. And then as far as like the building code issues that were raised, I just have to ask Brian what he does, if he's requiring rat walls and things. I think he is.
Yeah, it's still like, it's still to the building code. It's
Yeah.
not a shed.
He's requiring them to be.
Well,
like
I
that.
see your
It's a big
distinction.
garage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Big garage without.
Because especially when we talk about building code, it depends on what we're classifying that bit structure as, right?
Yeah, no,
right.
it's more than a big shed.
Okay.
It's built like a garage.
Right.
It's just that it looks like a barn.
For purposes
with
of,
maybe one big
Sorry.
door, or maybe a small window, or maybe a side, but again, when our only criterion looking at the plans is, yep, it meets the standards, it meets the setbacks, doesn't look like the neighborhood, so that's why we're bringing it to you and say, what is that standard? How do we determine that? That's where we've been stuck.
Yeah, we're gonna need more detail on that, because we can't just leave it up to the
Sure.
arbitrary discretion of what we think looks good on it.
Can I just piggyback off that? Is there a way we can add it to a subcategory of accessory buildings? Because I don't know if this is the point you're making, but I would think that accessory buildings is a little bit overly broad of a term. But it could cover pole barns, but it can cover a lot of other things. So maybe having it as a subcategory
possible
of
that we
an
could treat it
accessory.
that
That
way.
doesn't mean we have to define all of our accessories right now, but just to not deem it as specifically only accessory. Because I know that Joan, I know it's been years, but we've spoke about accessory dwellings in the past,
Yeah.
and that might be something that comes back up in our future.
I hope so.
Sure.
So these would be like detached garage / storage buildings? Is that what you're?
I mean, however Joe sees fit. I think,
Sure.
I just maybe not as I do think that if this is again the point you're making, I would say my point is accessory dwelling or accessory building is an overly broad category for something that we're discussing right now. Maybe as a subcategory, it could be, accessory dwelling, or sorry, I keep saying dwelling, accessory building, and then we can define it further from that as a subcategory, pole barn, even getting as specific as a pole barn, and letting it be or not be an accepted use. I'm just speaking off the cuff here. I don't know. But I do agree that it might be kind of an overly broad statement to say that all of our accessory buildings fall into this category.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Okay. Yeah, I'll bring you something and let you wrestle with some language, and we'll see where we go from there. Memo has some stuff about parking standards too, specifically for two uses. One is by appointment small businesses. We've had just a few people asking about this, so we figured we'd bring it up. So our ordinance establishes parking requirements for commercial and office uses. It's all based on square footage, generally speaking. We have a couple that are based on occupancy and things like that, but most of them are based on square footage. So, we've had a few people raise the issue of small businesses that conduct business on a by-appointment basis, and the general complaint being that they don't have the general public visiting their establishments, and therefore they don't need the same quantity of parking that a typical walk-in business would need. So we're raising the issue, kind of doing our due diligence here to discuss, whether you're interested in establishing a separate parking standard for by-appointment businesses that would require a few spaces in the typical standards. Some things that I think should be considered during that discussion. Any by-appointment business that wanted to convert to a walk-in model would suddenly be short of spaces. It can be difficult for the city to verify that a business is truly conducting only by-appointment sales or service. And then some by-appointment businesses, such as insurance offices or salons, are already either covered by their own standards or operating within current standards. So, it's one of these things where, yes, I understand the concern of someone who is, having people come to their establishment to, at a set time, and they don't have, general hours where they're open and anyone can walk in, and it's just them and maybe an employee and the people who are there to talk about a sale or whatever. And I understand why, under those circumstances, you would want to have less parking, because it's less to maintain and it's less to build in the first place. But I do think that some of these other concerns that I've outlined here have to be considered, particularly number one. Let's say you start as a by-appointment business and it's going really well, and all of a sudden you want to establish regular hours where you're open and anyone can come in. and you've only got 3 parking spaces because you started out as an by appointment business, well, all of a sudden, you're a regular retail space and you need 4 times that based on your square footage. That could be a real issue, especially on some of our more constrained sites. So, we're bringing it up because it's been raised and it's something that we've been thinking about and batting around a little bit. But the more I think about it, the more I'm like, I'm not sure this is the right thing to do necessarily.
Particularly if the business is transient. What if it is a by appointment business as it is being leased today, and then you modify the building so that what was a parking lot is now a whatever it is, and then you go out of business, and then now what does the next business have to do? They have to modify it to get that parking back to do it. And so in the interest of keeping flexibility for future businesses.
Joe, has
Sure.
has this been discussed? It would seem like the intent would cover this, right? Like when we think about it, labeling an intent to a B1, B2,
Sure.
we think about the traffic and we consider all these things. So is there a specific business or trend that we're noticing that is rearing higher yields of traffic than we once deemed it to think? And is that something that we need to consider conversion?
If anything, I would say most uses are yielding less traffic than they used to now. I struggle to think of a use that's causing more traffic than it would have in the past, particularly when it comes to retail. Maybe some restaurant uses might,
But this is
might
B1,
be producing a little
right?
bit
You're
more.
saying,
Yeah.
we're talking specifically B1, right?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
so things like retail and office, they're producing a lot less traffic than they once did, generally speaking. And I mean, office especially is producing a lot less traffic than it used to. I mean, everyone who bought homeowners insurance used to go to their broker's office to buy the homeowners insurance. And then they would probably go back every year to renew their homeowners insurance. And then they might go to 2 other brokers one year because they want to compare prices. And they're literally going to those offices. I haven't been to an insurance broker's office in like 20 years. I do it all online. I do it all, that's just the kind of appointment and the kind of traffic that's just not really generated anymore. And, to the degree that it is, it's a tiny fraction of what it once was. And so if you are the insurance office down, and we haven't heard from the insurance office down on the West 14 Mile, I'm just using it as an example. But if you are that insurance office down on West 14 Mile, I don't know how many people you've got walking through the door. I mean, you've got, I don't know how many parking spaces he's got. He's got like 9 parking spaces in the back. I'd be surprised if all 9 of them have been full ever in the last 10 years.
Yeah, so when we say B1, and I don't have the map in front of me, but are they shared spaces? We're we're getting a little territorial here. Is it like, well, these 3 spaces are supposed to be for me and my, and
No,
fish and,
they're
like,
dedicated spaces for that site.
that one
Yeah.
specific
We don't
business
really
and
have a lot of-
residents. Then are we hearing complaints from residents that might be overfill onto the streets, the residential streets, or?
Not really. No, we haven't really heard from residents complaining about parking going up the street. It's just I understand that the different businesses just operate differently from each other.
So it's the same business that's getting the uptick in customers that's complaining that they don't have enough parking lot for their uptick in customers? Or
Well,
I'm
no,
confused.
we're not really having, what we're hearing is people saying, well, I don't have anybody coming to my place. Why do I need all this parking?
Oh, okay, I
That's what
read that
we're
the wrong way then.
hearing.
Okay, so
That's
you're
what
saying
we're
we want to
hearing.
lower the limits, not up, okay.
That's what we're getting a request
Okay,
for.
gotcha.
So,
Sorry.
But again, these other concerns do come up when people are talking about, well, okay, I'm by appointment retail. I have people come here at certain times and I sell them stuff. And again, it comes back to that, well, what if they convert to a walk-in model? Then all of a sudden they need more parking than they've got. And what if they convert to the walk-in model without telling us that they're converting to the walk-in model? That's when you might get the car parked up the street.
Yeah, I
in front of
apologize.
the
I read
house.
that the opposite way
Right.
of like, there was not enough parking.
Yeah.
These guys are saying that they have too much parking.
They're being required to be
Well,
overparked.
Then we're
Yeah.
essentially changing the use and intent of a zone, don't you think? Like, I mean, like, I'm all for changing, but if we decide that B1 has these type of businesses within B1, and this is generally the type of flow of traffic, I would say that if we're getting a lot of complaints in that way, then we might want to think of looking at our ordinance in a way of making sure that we have the proper businesses in the proper zones versus like changing the type of parking. In Joan, you might be able to speak more to it. You just did a parking study. I don't know if they even went into B1 or if it was just the
downtown.
Okay,
Yeah.
but I would hesitate to lax on that personally, without taking a broader picture of the general use and intent of that use, that zone. That's just my opinion.
I share a similar sentiment. I think unless there's something specific within like our future land use that says we really, the B1's going to be something completely different.
Sure.
Have we considered, and I know this is not an ordinance solution, but if a property owner or business owner has that type of condition and then we have somebody else new moving in and it's not by appointment, I mean, these lots are really small and right next to each
Sure.
other within the B1. Can these business owners band together and say, would
They
the city
absolutely
consider
can.
it's like an agreement between these businesses, adjacent
Yeah.
businesses, and saying, okay, collectively, we have the number of spaces that justifies, the current, today's business operations.
We
I don't-
do
Shared
allow
parking
shared
agreement.
parking agreements, yep.
We had
Yeah.
that with the funeral, right?
Yeah.
We have shared parking, they're very difficult.
Yeah.
They can get
They
testy,
get
yeah.
very difficult when it comes to maintenance on a shared area and how you're gonna apportion out who pays for what. It starts to get a little, they're great to start out, and it starts to get a little sticky.
Yeah.
But I do agree that the onus then is on them,
It
and not
is.
on us
It's a-
to
it's a
change the
civil
intent,
matter, yeah,
essentially,
it
of,
is.
of a zone. I mean, essentially, we're kind of changing an intent without changing an intent, right? Like, unless there's like, okay, we'll say a hair salon that we find now that all hair salons might fit this criteria instead and
That's-
only have one
That's
customer.
one of the things is they are by appointment businesses, generally speaking, but we have a standard for them.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Specifically within one area of the B1, or is it the whole B1?
well, I mean, it's just individual use cases, so,
Just
and
by appointment.
that's the thing is,
So no on the street.
we're bringing it up because it's been brought up. We're not necessarily recommending that we do anything. It's kind of a due diligence thing for us, right? We can now say it has been discussed. with the
And I didn't mean to
commission.
tackle you about it or
No,
anything.
no,
I
it's-
just meant it's a
no,
lot broader than that, right?
Yeah, because we can now say this has been discussed at the planning commission level and a decision has been made not to make a change. And that kind of gives us what we need as an administrative staff to say, all right, you know what? We heard your concerns. And we're moving forward with the ordinance as is.
Sounds good.
One other thing on parking, though. So we've had a lot of pre-applications with people looking at multifamily. Most of them don't wind up moving forward, but nevertheless, we hear from a lot of people who are interested. And every one of them points to our parking standards for multifamily as like just not matching the market and not matching other ordinances. So we decided to take a little look into it. Right now, for multiple family and for attached single-family units, we require 1 space for an efficiency unit, 1.5 spaces for a 1-bedroom unit, 2 spaces for each 2-bedroom unit, and 3 spaces for a 3+ bedroom unit when we have multifamily housing. Provided a little comparison to some nearby communities. But one thing that I'll note right off the bat is that we require 3 spaces for a 3-bedroom unit in a multifamily development. You can build a 5-bedroom home and you only need 2 spaces. So that standard to me doesn't seem very logical. It's like we're holding a 3-bedroom apartment to a higher standard than we are a single-family house. So I think that right there, that's something we should change. That should go down to 2. It should match the standard that we have for detached single-family houses. It's just not, it's not fair, really, to require the extra bedroom, the extra space for the extra bedroom just because it's an attached unit.
Do you think, Joe, that would incentivize more
See,
3-bedroom?
This is something I wanted to bring up
That's so, like, my thing.
We keep saying,
Yeah.
well, why don't you have any 3-bedroom unit?
Yeah.
Well, that's why.
Yeah, goodness.
It makes it hard to fit the building on the site when you need that much parking. And that's kind of what the rest of these standards do too. They require a certain amount of land per unit that is devoted to parking, and it limits your flexibility on the types of units that you can make. So if we really do want more 3-bedroom units, we should have a parking standard that's more in line with what you would need if you built a 3-bedroom house, which there are hundreds of 3-bedroom houses, and they all just need 2 spaces. So that's one that I would say that should definitely change, because I think we will get more 3-bedroom units proposed if that standard changes. And the other ones, I've kind of looked at these other standards and various other standards and what I've heard from these developers, what I've seen in other communities that I'm working in. Farmington Hills has had 250-plus unit apartment buildings proposed in the last year. One has been approved, the other one's still working its way through the process. Both of them shot for, they had a mix of 1, 2, and 3-bedroom units, and both of them shot for, based on their market data, 1.35 spaces per unit as an average for the project. So what I've got at the bottom here, based on that and a few other things, is some suggested other standards. 1, we require a space for an efficiency unit because we're doing that already, and you need to have 1 space for a unit. We have 1.5 for each 1-bedroom unit now. That could be lowered to 1.25. The 2 for each 2-bedroom unit to 1.75, and then the 3 for a 3+ bedroom unit to 2 per 3+ bedroom unit. That brings the standard down a little bit. Not a ton. It's like 1/4 of a space per unit for the most part. And of course, the efficiency units doesn't change. But it brings us more in line with other communities. It brings us more in line with what we're hearing from the actual market of developers. And it, I think, creates more of that flexibility on the type of unit that we get that we're looking for, because we do want the larger units. We don't want buildings full of efficiency units. It's every conversation we've had about it has really revolved around that.
Why?
Well,
I wasn't part of them, so I don't know.
we want some efficiency units, that's fine. But when you get a building full of efficiency units, that's not bringing in families, and that's not bringing in students for the school district and other things that you might get with a larger unit, like a 3-bedroom unit. That's some of the points that we've raised. Remind me if I'm missing any of the other things that we've discussed in the past. But there has definitely been, in every conversation we've had about multifamily development, there has been discussion about why can't we get more larger units. that would accommodate families. And this is really why, like, our parking requirements are pretty much the reason that we're not getting as many 2 and 3 bedroom units as we might like.
Joe, I hate to be so into details. So when you spoke with them and they said it was 1.35 on average, I would think, and I don't know the criteria, I'm sure, listen, when you talk to a builder, they'll tell you, look, I think we need 0 parking, right? So like.
They can go to Ann Arbor and get it.
Right, yeah, they can take the bus, can't they? We'll just build there. But, you know, I'm sure it varies depending on like, if there's like 5, you said 200 unit buildings, don't count on me for math, but like, you know, if they have 25 3 bedrooms, but, you know, 150, you know, 1 bedrooms, how many visitors might they average? And, you know, I'm sure that there's a math, and I'm sure you didn't rely on the builders to do the math, like I said prior. Is there a sweet spot between like, how many, like a percentage of 1 bed versus 2 versus 3? I would, you know, especially, we know that you can absolutely have, sorry, Joe, but you can absolutely have 3 single grown adults that all drive cars living in, or you can have a single mom with a boy and a girl, like me, you know, living in a 3 bed. So, but we want to incentivize versus, I guess we don't even, I don't think it's really on us to incentivize, but of course we want more families, right? Is there a sweet spot for that? Was that taken into consideration already or no?
Yeah, first I would say it's not necessarily an incentive so much as it is providing flexibility.
Okay.
To provide a different mix of units. I would say the guys who are going for those lower, those kind of 1 point something average, they're probably 50%-ish 1 bedrooms, and then the rest is a mix of 2 and 3s. And the guys that I tend to listen to the most are the guys who are going to be the property managers of the projects that they're building. Because if someone who lives in their building can't put their car somewhere, they're going to hear about it.
Absolutely.
So if they've built 20 complexes and they've got 1.65 spaces per unit on average, and they're generally got that kind of mix, and they're not having problems, they're not hearing from their tenants that they don't have enough parking, then that is easier to rely on than someone who builds it and sells it and never has to deal with it, right?
I appreciate that.
So yeah, that's what we're hearing from these companies that they're not just a developer, they're a property management company.
And you put that 1.35 as your consensus on what that is from the managers?
That's what they said. What we'd wind up with here with these standards, it's still divided by, it's not just an overall average per unit, it's still divided by type of unit. So we would probably wind up with a higher rate than that. We would most likely wind up in the, you know, depending on the mix of uses, we'd probably be in that 1.75 per unit neighborhood if we got a decent mix of units. But, you know, we're not going all the way down. We're not going to where Ann Arbor is, where they just eliminated most of their parking requirements. We're not going necessarily all the way down to just a straight 1.5 per dwelling unit, which is where, you know, Ferndale and a couple other communities are, Pleasant Ridge. But we are bringing it down slightly. And we're taking out the most onerous requirement, which is the 3 for a 3+ bedroom unit.
My other question to that is, was there consideration taking in that analysis the amount of city parking available or not?
So, well, in Farmington Hills, there is no city parking.
Right, there's
none at all. And, you know, in Clawson, a multifamily complex outside of the downtown is not really going to have much on-street parking.
Okay, maybe I shouldn't say city.
generally
Maybe I
speaking.
should say proximity to other sources of parking, because Clawson, you
Sure.
can't park on the street 2 to 6,
You can't
which I
park-
love.
yeah, overnight you can't,
I
yeah.
totally keep it, right? But but there might be others, Ferndale, goodness, if you drive down Ferndale at, 8 a.m. on a Sunday, good luck. Because you can't pull over anywhere. So there's a lot of things to take in, and I don't know if I'm being too far in the weeds here, but do you feel like this is still a good evaluation at the numbers you
Yeah.
put forth, considering what our off-street parking is like and our
Yeah,
proximity?
we basically thought, well, most of these multifamily developments that are going in, they front on 14 Mile or Rochester or something. They're not going to have on-street parking available. So that's not going to be something that they're able to take advantage of. So, yeah, that was considered when we thought about it. And, a lot of these community, Madison Heights, those complexes, there's nowhere to park on the street for most of those.
Well, Madison
And
Heights does have street parking, don't they? They have on-street
They
parking.
do have on-street parking. They've got the same overnight restriction that we do.
Oh, do they?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so does Berkeley for that
The
matter.
reason that we're able to have the no parking on the street overnight policy is because, in general, we've managed through our ordinances to find a home for everyone's car.
Right.
So the structure that is in place today, I would argue, is working. We can make it no requirement. We can make it so that, you can have a very tall apartment complex with no parking on it. They will find a place to park. It will be a manufactured crisis at that point that someone will love to litigate, and I'm pretty sure they'll end up on the street. So I like the idea that we manage this in such a way that encourages families, but I also think that toddlers don't drive, so I don't know why a third bedroom needs a car spot if we're trying to promote the kids. So I'm not in favor of increasing or decreasing the parking requirement for the multifamily complexes, but I also haven't researched all of the points you brought up. So I appreciate you doing this because it gives me something to go look at. So thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right. If there are no other questions, I guess we'll wrap that, and I can bring you stuff on all that next time. I think that will probably be the first October meeting. We're getting the illustrations together for the sign ordinance, but I don't want to rush it, so I think it'll be the first October meeting.
Sure. Just one other thing, the Clausen Manor is a good case study for this, right?
Well,
Well, I only
it's
say it's a good case study
seniors.
because they're changing, I think, right? Then didn't they say that they were modifying some of the layout to have more or less efficiencies or something like that?
No, they're not changing the number of
That's not
units in
happening?
there.
Okay.
Yeah.
They're updating the units, just
Yeah.
updating the interiors, but they're not changing.
1 to 2 or 2 to, okay.
Right, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, shall we move on then to other business?
Yeah.
What was the end result on the multi-unit parking?
Well,
Bring
I mean,
something back?
yeah, I can bring you some more data, and then I've got my suggestion, and I'll bring you some more data, and you can make a decision. I mean, we don't necessarily need to set a public hearing on it or anything like that. We can move it forward when we're comfortable moving it forward, and if it moves forward in tandem with a couple other things, that's not a bad thing.
Sorry, what were you talking about?
I just hadn't heard what the outcome was on the last thing that Joe was talking about.
Oh.
The
Yeah.
number of spaces for multi-unit. What was he bringing something back? Or is there some sort of feeling about how that was gonna go or what? That was all. That's my
Okay.
question. So he's bringing more information back.
Yep.
We'll get another crack at it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I certainly have some homework to do because I was not well versed in it, so I know what I have to do. But
So Joe said he talked to property management companies.
Yep.
Which is the people who don't just put up a building and then sell it, but actually have
Run
to
it.
follow it and track what happens, which
Right.
you get a better feel for what's going on.
yeah.
While we're doing other business, Joan, how's it going with those homes on Phillips and, is it Bywood?
I don't know what's happening with the litigation with the individual homeowners and how they're handling things. I do know that we did get the porta potties moved, and that our fire marshal is still working to get the propane tanks moved. He contacted he sent a letter to the builder, didn't get a response, and he's now working with the vendors to see about getting those picked up, just from a safety standpoint, since nobody is there working or watching them, so.
Yeah, what a mess.
So John Ruthenbeck's following it.
I appreciate that. And I can only imagine neighbors aren't excited. Are we worried about rodents at this point or not?
No, the building is, the garage door openings are open, but the buildings themselves are secure.
Okay.
And somebody asked me about, well, the property's uneven and somebody could be there and trip. It's private property. We don't go in and level the land and, make it even. So we as a city, we can do what we can do, and we're working on that.
Thank you.
Well, and Bywood has a roof now, so,
They've had a roof,
yeah.
yeah. So anyway, we're just waiting to see what happens.
So it's in the process.
Yes,
In
it's
all-
those
yeah.
individual property owners, because the land, the lots are owned by individuals. They hired a builder.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so they have to work through that process. It's not ours. Yeah.
I don't envy that. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Anything else under other business? Joe's done. Everybody else sitting up here. How about a planner's report?
I gave you a report. I don't know, were there any questions? Was there anything else? If not.
I
that
saw new
was-
pictures of the Church of Clausen, so I see that they're making lots of progress.
They are.
So
Yes, they have
He seems-
persevered.
he seems very, very excited, so
Yes.
congrats to Church of Clausen.
Exactly,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
My understanding is the windows that he's put in are not really windows, right? They're sealed on the inside. They appear to be windows on the outside.
I do not remember, Greg, what their site
I
plan
haven't gone to
showed.
look at it, but somebody told me that the outside, it looks like a window, but the inside is a solid wall.
I
So
don't,
it's a decorative feature outside. Same thing we could put
well,
on
maybe.
pole
What-
barns.
We already approved that long ago, so.
Yeah, I don't even
If it
remember.
works for the church,
but-
you know?
Take it up with Laurent, okay?
Okay, and then staff report and training opportunities. You gave us some of those on our,
Right, and that's really just a matter of, you're gonna have to keep, if something new comes up on Michigan Planning Association, I'll send it to you, but, or any interesting articles, we'll send them on your way, but the links are there. Citizen Planner, I think, opened again, so that's always something to look at if anyone's interested. If you're interesting, that's good too, but interested is fine.
The Michigan Association Planning Conference is coming up in October, October 14th. It's on Mackinac Island. Jill Boehm and I are both giving presentations up there at the conference, so.
And they've invited all of us, so.
But if you happen to be up there during the conference, whether you're at the conference or not, we are going to be having some sort of little party, and I think it's going to be at the Pink Pony on Wednesday night.
Oh. I apologize, Chair. Can I kind of go back to other business real quick? There's a point I forgot to make
Sure.
in regards to, there's a workshop happening.
yeah, I don't have a date in front of me. I was going to bring that up. There's a
I believe
workshop.
it's Monday, the 19th.
Yeah, it's Monday the 19th at 7 PM. And the city council actually invited planning commission to attend. Obviously, Ms. Redmond has been engaged on this. And so they're hoping to have some more input from the public regarding the regular rental unit ordinance and then the short-term rental unit ordinance. So you're all officially, unofficially invited.
I believe it's at 7:30?
7 PM.
7 PM?
Seven, yeah, I
Right
haven't-
here.
I haven't seen it posted on the city page yet.
It's on the Minutes on Demand page right now. Yeah, it was posted today, I
Maybe,
believe.
you seem to be on Facebook all the time, maybe you could
I know, I've been busy.
throw a note out there.
I'll try to throw it out there.
Residents to show up for it, yeah.
Yeah, and I did send you a few of the bills that I referenced in the last city council meeting. I don't know if you want to send, or however this process works. If anybody wants to be there, I think it would be valuable, even knowing nothing about prior discussions. I feel like planning could add some value to
Right.
the discussion overall. So,
More the merrier. Okay, no attorney tonight, so we have no legal update. If no one else has anything else, I'll wait for an adjournment motion.
I'll make a
Mr. Chair, I
motion.
motion to adjourn.
Motion,
Second.
support, roll call, please.
Ms. Redmond,
Yes.
Mr. Fitzer,
Yes.
Mr. Harrow,
Yes.
Mr. Cusero,
Yes.
Mr. Nushai.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.